The concept of the multiplier is a follow-up to our lecture on C plus I, consumption plus investment, where we shifted the consumption function up and looked at what happened to the new equilibrium level. I briefly explained what the multiplier was and how it worked, but just as a reminder, the multiplier will amplify or multiply the amount of spending throughout the economy, because your spending is going to be claimed as somebody else's income. So let's say that the economy improves, jobs are being created, you get a good job. As a result, you have extra money. Some of it you will spend, some you are going to save. You will spend according to the marginal propensity to consume. So let's say you finally have enough money to afford that new car that you thought about buying but did not have enough money for. So you go to the dealership, you purchase the car. Now the dealer has the extra money, the money that you spent on that car. This to him is a new income. Now he has more money to be able to, let's say, remodel his kitchen. He buys and purchases the services as well as the raw materials. As a result, the cabinet maker and the contractor, all of these are going to have extra money to spend. So let's say that the cabinet maker right now is able to go on vacation. You have the airlines that are going to gain from that, the hotels that are going to gain, the incomes from the entertainment, going to amusement parks, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, a certain amount of money injected into the economy is going to create a large increase in incomes that are claimed, although it all comes from the same initial amount that you got. So let's look at the mathematics of the multiplier. Here I have some numbers for incomes, consumption, and saving. So let's say that on the first round, you, as the individual, have just gotten your job that pays $100, let's say, a week. Well, let's just say that this is a long time ago, and it really represented a lot of money. So you get your job, you're paid $100. Out of that, you're going to be spending some and saving some. Now, what happens to the money that you spend? That becomes, in the second round, somebody else's income. And that person will consume, spend some, and save some. So now that amount that this second round person is spending becomes the third person's income, and so on and so forth. So how are we going to calculate that? Well, you could write a program and have the program take away 50% of every number, and then you go into smaller, minute numbers, add up all those figures, and that will represent your sum, the sum of incomes that have been generated. Here already you have 175, 187.5, and so on and so forth. But there is a shortcut to this. And the shortcut is going to be based on the formula that we use to calculate the multiplier, which is 1 over the MPS. So this is the formula for the multiplier. It is the same thing as 1 over 1 minus MPC. Remember, MPS plus MPC add up to 1. But it's easier to look at 1 over MPS, because if you use a fraction, you flip over the MPS and you get your multiplier. So right here, you have an MPS of 0.5 MPS, and therefore your MPC also has to be 0.50. So 1 over 0.50 is equal to 2, or if you looked at this as 1 divided by 1/2, then this MPS, flipping it over, will give you your 2, which is your multiplier. What does a multiplier of 2 imply? It means that whatever amount of money is injected first into the economy, the sum or the multiplied amount, the value of all the incomes that will have been claimed, including that 100, is going to be twice as high. So for this, you will have incomes going up by 200 for the whole economy after all the spending and respending will have been done. And here you will have 100 for consumption and 100 for your savings. So how would it look if we had a situation where the marginal propensity to consume was higher? Would that have a larger or a smaller impact? Here's the information for an economy where the marginal propensity to consume is higher. How much is it? Well, from the 100, you spend 80. So here, your marginal propensity to consume is equal to 0.8. And therefore, your marginal propensity to save is 0.2. And what happens? Well, you still get the $100, but instead of spending 50, you're spending 80. So that 80 then becomes the income of the next person, who will spend 80%, which is 64, and that will become the income of the third person. And that 52 is the 80% of the 64, which becomes somebody else's income, and so on and so forth. So now, how much will this be as a sum? Again, you could just continue calculating back and forth, or else you would use the shortcut of the multiplier. So for here, your marginal propensity to save is equal to 0.2. So 1 over 0.2 is equal to 5, or an MPS of 0.2 is equal to the same thing as 1/5. And remember, if you flip over your MPS, you will be getting your multiplier. Well, 5 is equal to the flipping over of your marginal propensity to save. Because for the fraction, it would be 1 over 1/5, which is equal to 1 over 1 times 5 over 1, which is equal to 5. But the easiest way is just to flip over your MPS. So what would be this number right here? Well, since we have 100 here, and the multiplier is 5, then this will have to be 500. 80% of that 500 will be your increase in consumption. And in terms of savings, you will have 100, which would be the sum of all the money put away. So here's a few more things that you need to know about multiplier and calculations. Let's say that you have a marginal propensity to consume of 3/4. Can you figure out how high is the multiplier? Well, if the MPC is 3/4, then the MPS must be 1/4, and the multiplier must be equal to 4. So that if $50 was injected into the economy, the GDP equilibrium will go up by 4 times as much, and that would be 50 times 4, 200. Now here's another way that we're going to be calculating the multiplier. Let's say that I gave you a consumption function. I gave you 2 elements, one consumption alone, the next one consumption plus investment. And I'm telling you that when consumption alone, with consumption alone, you are at equilibrium at $500 billion worth of GDP. Now, if it is C plus I, then your GDP goes up to 300. Now, can you calculate the size of investments? The first thing that you would, where is it that we calculated investments? Well, it was the vertical distance between the C and the C plus I. So this vertical distance right here is equal to your investments. How much is that number? Well, since this is 700 and this must be 800 because it is off the 45-degree line, so then this must be equal to 100. Okay, so again, since the vertical distance between the two lines, as you were able to measure right here, is 100, then this represents the amount of investment. So can you tell me how large is the multiplier? Well, the multiplier showed you what kind of an increase we had when we were at the first equilibrium of 500 and then at the next equilibrium of 800. How much of an increase did you have? Your increase right here is of $300 billion. Now, what triggered that increase of $300 billion? It was the injection of investments. And how much were those investments? The size of the injection? 100. So if you know that income went up by 300 because of a 100 increase in GDP, then the multiplier must be equal to 3. 100 times 3 is going to give you a change in income of $300. So this is the mathematical calculation of the multiplier. Now, a few things that I'd like to say about why the multiplier is important. Well, you will see that GDP can also be influenced. Another injection would be government spending, and that's going to be the next lecture. So we have to be very careful as to how much money we're putting into the economy to make sure that we don't overshoot. Can the GDP decrease in a multiplied fashion just like it increased in a multiplied fashion? And the answer is yes. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, many politicians felt there was going to be much less money spent on the military, since our main enemy then was the Soviet bloc, and we were kind of on better terms with them. So they were trying to figure out what was going to be done with all this money. Instead of spending it on guns and tanks, they were going to spend it on more civilian goods. So, of course, we had a long list of things that we would like to have done with that money, but we did not realize that this kind of a decrease in military spending was also going to have an adverse effect or a negative effect on GDP in general. Why? Because as bases were being closed, military bases, then those people and the community around the base, where you had restaurants, maybe hairdressers, maybe movie theaters, etc., were also losing their customers because everybody was packing up and leaving. And so there was a negative multiplied decrease in income because of the bases closing down. So remember that the multiplier amplifies any change, and therefore we have to be very, very careful as to how much we are going to be, how much we're going to be injecting into the economy to make sure that we don't overshoot. And when we do reduce, we want to make sure that the reduction in income is going to be also limited.